but it was, there were waves and periods, and I think everybody goes through them, like, different stages of it. And I know people talk a lot about childless by circumstance, but I think that's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
And actually, when I was going to groups with people without children, and those were mixed between people who were child free and childless, I actually found I had more in common with people who were child free, oddly, than I did with some of the childless by circumstance people, because as a group, we had generally made a conscious decision not to have children or to have children, and then going about trying to achieve that rather than saying, well, I
Yeah.
drifted to X point and then changed my mind and it was too late, or I didn't have a partner, or so there was a kind of commonality. And also, there's also a very strong commonality among people who are infertile for very obvious reasons. I mean,
Mhm.
you can't physically have a child even if you've tried.
Yeah.
And I kind of think the people that went through fertility treatment that failed are one step further even than me, because I can't imagine what that would be like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's really hard. If I think about that, I think of that as being an incredibly hard and difficult thing to go through, because it's like all the waves I went through, but condensed through each
Yeah.
cycle of IVF. And I didn't go through that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's lucky in some weird sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm really sorry I forgot to put the recording on there, so hopefully
That's all
you
right.
get the rest of it. So, was there one, going to your book, Childless Voices, was there one story in particular from the women that you met while you were writing Childless Voices that was especially moved you? Was there?
Yes, sure, the Indian girl. Partly because the way I found her was quite convoluted. So I was doing some work with a charity in India called Reach India, and they were amazing and worked in quite difficult parts of India, around Bihar. And the women I met there were incredibly strong and incredibly brave and had terrible, terrible consequences for being childless. So they could be shunned by their groups, shunned by their community. And it was through a chain of people through that I met Sue. And I don't want spoilers in case people don't know the book, but her story was very sad. And also because I was told it secondhand as it was.
Yeah,
And I kind of, it was just very moving and very sad and almost inevitable what happened to her, but I found that the most difficult. But partly because I had done quite a lot of work with this charity in India, and I'd come to know some of these women really well, so it was quite difficult. And there was this kind of, obviously their lives were so different from mine, but there was a commonality amongst, I mean, with an interpreter helping, because obviously I didn't speak their language, but there was a commonality between our
yeah.
biological situations, if nothing else.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I really enjoyed the book, and the story that really moved me was about Rosa, the Roma girl, who
Mm.
had, had experienced a really traumatic event, had been raped and become pregnant, and then had an abortion, and a lot later on discovered that actually, while she had been having that abortion, the state had basically sterilised her. So actually, when she was trying to get pregnant, she didn't know that she couldn't get pregnant. And I think for me, I am a childless woman as well. And I think what touched me, and I think I find is that how everybody that I speak to who is childless, their stories are so different, how they've come to
Mhm.
there. But for some people, there's a lot of trauma within or traumatic experiences within why they're childless, and it could be really difficult for people, to kind of come to terms with that. So I found it a really kind of moving story, that one. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, it was an odd story because I came about it in a kind of abstract way. I mean, at the time I met her, I wasn't researching childlessness. I was learning her language, Calderes Roma, which is my husband's part Romani. So I've always been interested in the Roma communities. I was trying to learn Calderes, and that's how I met her. But her story's absolutely horrible. But what's really terrifying about it is it's far more common than you'd expect. So sterilisation among Romani populations was really, really common and still happens. Um, similarly, sterilisation of women in Peru, which I touch on, or even of disabled people in various countries that we might think of as progressive. So it's a real, and often these women, most of the time, these women don't know what's happened to them. So they're trying to get pregnant, and of course, they can't.
Yeah, yeah. And that must be awful. And I suppose it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, about women's health and how women's kind of menstrual issues are dealt with. Is that I think there's still a lot of kind of like, I think, lack of understanding and really sort of like dismissiveness towards women and women's issues, and I think it's maybe not as great here in UK, but there's still some of it. But obviously, there's a lot kind of worse in the world elsewhere, sort of thing. And it's just,
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think one of the things writing the book made me feel was that okay, this wasn't a great kind of way to end up. It wasn't my choice, but compared to how my situation would have been in so many other countries, it was a lot better. And actually, when I was in Italy, I was amazed at how much better it was there still.
right.
So the level of care that I got from the National Health Service, wasn't private or anything, was quite extraordinary when we were in Italy. And there was a real kind of, and I said, look, I'm not going to be able to have a baby. It's not going to happen. I've been told that. And they said, well, we've got new things. Would you like to try? There was always this kind of like real comfort and attention.
Gosh, yeah, uh-huh. And do you think that's just a cultural thing in Italy, or?
I don't know. I don't know if it was because of the part of Italy we lived in. We lived in Imperia. I don't know. I thought the health service was amazing. It was an amazing, and it wasn't something that I'd expected. I don't really know, to be honest. And at the time, I was also going through menopause while I was getting help with them for the endometriosis. So it was a kind of combination. And I wasn't interested in the menopause really because it made you a bit miserable, it made you a bit tired, you got hot flushes. But all of this was nothing to kind of like permanent pain, passing out, feeling sick all the time. So it was kind of like, for me, the thing was, is my endometriosis going to go? Is it going to end? And it did. I was lucky. I mean, people like Hilary Mantel famously have written about it, and hers didn't go post-menopause. I was actually offered a complete hysterectomy, and I took a gamble. In my late 30s, they offered me it, and I took a gamble because I knew that my mum had had a very early menopause, and I thought I might be 3 or 4 years out of menopause, and I was. So it was fine, but it was a gamble, but I took the gamble.
Yeah, yeah. So, how did you find all the different like accounts of childlessness in for your book? How did you sort of find those?
Different ways actually. So I put things on social media. And sometimes I got a hit, old Twitter, now X. I put things on there. I got a few hits through that. I did some things on Facebook pages that were about childlessness and got some DMs through that. But also I approached charities directly. So I would the Reach India people I didn't know before I started writing the book, and then I talked to them and I said, well, is there anything I can do that would be useful? And they said, yes, you can. So, and through them I met lots of people. There was a church group I found online that was supporting women who were childless, and they put me in touch with lots of people in Africa. And that was how quite a lot of the African stories in the book came about. And then there was a network for Indigenous people in South America, and I got in touch with them, and they found some people for me in the Andes. So it took a lot of time, but it was just following through on things I had read or articles I had found, and then trying to make contact with actual people.
Yeah. And did you find that people were open to talking to you about
it? Sometimes, not always. I found that if I began by saying, if it was speaking woman to woman, and I began by saying, I'm childless, I'm writing a memoir about being childless, about being infertile, I'm trying to understand other people's experiences so that I can share them, then people spoke to me, and it was rare that somebody didn't.
Yeah, yeah. Great.
It was a kind of childless empathy, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So, do you think you've come to terms or come to accept your childlessness? Do you think you
Yeah,
have?
I would say we have. I think as a couple we have.
Yeah, yeah. And did you? And I suppose I'm interested in this. Did your husband, did he have a different journey, or do you think you worked through it together, or?
No, we've talked about it a lot actually. I think a lot of him was supporting me, and as he keeps saying, he had to live with not having a child, but he didn't have to go through all the physical pain stuff. But I mean, I was very lucky. I mean, he's a good husband. I was well looked after. You know, he was the one that went
Yeah,
out when we were having a weekend break in Budapest, and he went out tramping around Budapest because I had a period a week after my last period and couldn't move. So he went tramping around Budapest to look for sanitary towels and painkillers.
yeah,
You know, so I mean, he had a very disrupted life for a period we were together. I passed out on our second date because I started a period. Not our second date, actually, that's not true. No, it was the second time we gone out with a group of friends rather than our second date was fine. But it was very near. We'd only been going out 2 or 3 weeks. So I was very honest with him right from the start. I said, I have this condition. It's really annoying. I try to live my life as best I can, but sometimes it intervenes and it just annoys me, but I'm trying my best. But at that point, of course, I didn't know it would make me infertile, but I knew, you know, there
yeah.
might be a risk. So
So it sounds as though you've worked through it together, and I think it sounds as though honesty between the two of you has been the kind of really important part within.
yeah, I think it has. I mean, we always thought we would have children right from the beginning. We said we'll have children. That was always and we gradually accepted that we wouldn't, and then did other things together that we wouldn't have done otherwise. And it's been fine. I think, and I think there are things that still bother us both. So I mean, we have caring responsibilities, but people assume that means children, or they assume somehow your caring responsibilities are less than those of people that have children, and that really annoys him, and it annoys me. So
Yeah.
we'll both get cross about that.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways coming back to Scotland has changed us a bit because Scotland is very pro-natalist. I find it's extremely. So I think that was a bit of a shift when we came back. There was a few weeks when we thought, actually, this is really pro-natalist country. You know, it's kind of like, and we hadn't noticed that in most of the other places we'd lived to that extent. Even Italy, which has come a long way from it's kind of not quite as.
Yeah. So you mean sort of like really family orientated, really sort of, yeah.
No, because we're quite family orientated still with wider family, more kind of like, but that women have children younger, they tend to have, I don't know what the statistics on this, it's just an impression, but everybody seems to have children. So it's even where I work, most people have children, and where I used to work in London, most people did not. So it's kind of, I find myself and that's fine, but it changes your perspective. So we don't have as many people to go out with because people with children are at home looking after their children. We have caring responsibilities that other people don't always respect, but people are getting used to it. So it's kind of I don't know. I find Scotland different than that. It's very childbearing focused, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that your experience? I mean, you're up here too.
Yeah, I think possibly, yes, it is. I think I've probably been quite lucky that a lot of my friends don't have family. I don't know if that's been chance that that's the case, but I think, yeah, I mean, the rest of my sisters all have family, and certainly I was made to feel as though I didn't really belong by my mum, I think, because I didn't have children. Do you know? So
that's hard.
yeah, it is hard. So I think that was difficult for me. But I worked as a teacher, and yes, most people have family, and I think it's the first question people ask you. I mean, even yet, when I go out and you meet new people, they say, "And have you got family?" And
people do that here. They don't do it so much down south. That's one of the things I've really noticed here. Everybody asks, and I find it quite rude. So it actually gets my back up a little bit. But people ask here. It's what they'll talk to you for 5 minutes and say, "Have you got kids?" And I'll be like,
yeah,
Why assume? Why, and even some people will then say, oh, did you not want them? And I just find that impossible. And I'm not used to that anymore. I find that quite odd and quite intrusive. My parents weren't like that. They were incredibly supportive. And actually, I never felt any pressure to have kids from them. They always said, if you want kids, you have them. If you don't, you don't. It's up to
yeah,
you.
yeah. And
I was lucky. I never had that. I
yeah,
know friends who've had that. And I think it's another layer of,
yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah. I think it depends on the sort of family background you've come from. So we've talked a wee bit, but do you perceive any other differences between how tribeless people were treated within England and Scotland? Are there any other differences, or
I don't think it's just England and Scotland. Actually, I think Ireland might be a bit more like Scotland. Actually, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, I work in a university, which is a nice place to work. So people tend to be incredibly considerate, incredibly kind, thoughtful. It's because it's a university. So I'm extremely lucky in my colleagues, and that makes I realise that's quite a privileged position to be in. If I am somewhere else, so
Mhm.
I'm out, I don't know, having a night out, or with a group of people I don't really know very well, or I'm doing an activity I enjoy, then people will be very different. So there will be all those kind of awkward child questions or focus on children. And I don't find that with colleagues. The thing is, I actually quite I mean, my closest, the girlfriend I see most of here has two children, and I really like her children. And in April, I will go and stay with my friend in Italy who has a child whom I really love. So it's not like I resent other people having children. I don't. Their children give me great pleasure. It's the attitude, the kind of expectation, and
Yeah,
the assumptions that annoy me.
yeah, yeah. I can totally relate to that. I think it's the yeah, I think it's sometimes the kind of the kind of judgment that comes when you say no, I don't have children. I think that can be quite difficult.
Yeah.
Kind of come to
There's
terms.
somebody on the chat. Can you
with.
see the chat? There's somebody on the
Yeah,
chat, someone Amma, who said you can definitely relate to caring responsibility
responsibility.
assumptions.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's when you were talking about that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it is. I, I don't know, but I had caring responsibilities until quite recently, and I think I bore the brunt of them because I was the one in the family that didn't have children. So
Interesting.
you know,
I'm an only child, so
yeah.
I mean it's not, yeah, that's a different thing. But
So I don't know if
yeah,
that's
and I don't mind mine. I mean I enjoy, I'm just glad I've got my mum still, so but it's
yeah,
not, I'm not complaining about it. It's just that there are certain things we do for her, and it's, I mean, my colleagues are really good about it. I would never have a problem at work if I said I've got to take my mum to clinic, or my mum's got to go in for,
yeah,
something. I would never have a problem at work, but I am very aware that I'm in a very lucky position
yeah.
because of my job and the nature of where I work. And I know many people who are not in that position.
So do you still think about how what your life would have been like if you hadn't been infertile? Do you ever think about that, or
Not really anymore. No. Sometimes we'll say, well, usually in a negative way, we'll say something like, oh, well, we wouldn't have all four cats if we'd had a daughter or a son or
yeah,
something like that. I suppose there's been quite a lot now in old age care and what happens if you're childless, but then I know lots of people that don't look after their parents.
yeah,
So who's to say that you would have a child, and would you really want your child to spend its time looking
yeah.
after you when you're old? So I'm not sure. We don't really, I don't worry about it anymore
Mm.
or kind of like imagine it. I've kind of moved on from that, I think.
Yeah. I think for me, in general, I think I've come to terms with it. But I do think when I hear of people having grandchildren, there is a wee bit of sadness, I think, there for me. I think, oh, that's something I'm not going to experience, and I would quite like the thought of that. But I don't think it's massive, but I think I wouldn't be honest if I wasn't acknowledging that there's a sadness there for me around that.
Well, that's interesting. The grandchildren thing I don't have at all because I
Yeah,
think even if I'd had children, I wouldn't assume that they would have children because
yeah,
my parents didn't. So there's a kind of, there is a kind of
yeah,
background to that, but my parents never assumed I would have. So if I'd had a child, I would never assume they would have a child.
Yeah.
It's a choice.
So, and I suppose that's kind of, we're talking a wee bit into the next question, which was about how did your own family react? But it sounds as though your family were okay with your childless.
Yeah, they were really fine. I mean, I was always brought up to believe that it was up to me. If I wanted kids,
Yeah.
I could have them. If I didn't, I didn't. And it wasn't an expectation in any way. And that was extremely unusual. I mean, I grew up in a council estate in Bellshill. It was extremely unusual. There was a general expectation that you would have a couple of kids,
Yeah.
and but my parents were very definite that if I felt it wasn't something I wanted to do because I had other interests or wanted a career, that was fine, and they would support me. Or if I did want to have them, they would support me. So I never felt pressured either way, ever. I can honestly say that. But I am aware that that's quite unusual.
Yeah, I think that is quite unusual because I think going back to that discussion we've been having about maybe in Scotland, I don't know if it's the same in England, but people are very family orientated, having children and that. So I think that is, I feel that that is quite unusual. It's certainly not been my experience. I think there was an expectation, at some point, although my
It's
parents were
good.
very encouraging about, you know, going further in education and doing the best that I could. But I think they still felt there was still that kind of, that family would be part of your life as well. So I think it's really interesting that everybody has different experiences. I suppose it ties into your book as well, Childless Voices, about all the different experiences that people have had of being childless in a world where maybe children are regarded as being sort of the kind of what everybody should be sort of aiming for.
I would say that one of the things I was brought up to believe that having a child was not necessarily the pinnacle of a woman's life or achievement. And I was, my mum always said, if you want to do it, do it. It's a great thing to do, but it's not, it's not the be all and end all. It's not the best thing anybody can ever do. And I think she grew up, I mean, she grew up much poorer even than I did. And she was brought up in an atmosphere that wasn't like that at all. And she railed against it. So she
Yeah,
kind of instilled that in me. And maybe in a sense that made my childless journey easier because I had a sense of worth. I've never thought my own worth was diminished because I couldn't have children.
yeah,
I have thought that my own life experience was diminished because I couldn't have them at one point, not anymore. But I never thought I was less of a person for not being able to.
yeah,
And I know many women do, but I think that's a question of society and family and the way other people make them feel.
yeah,
And also it's sometimes self-perpetuating. So some childless support groups, and I've been to some like this and literally left, are about, oh, let's sit and talk about, your city, but they're not about building the person for who they are
yeah,
without children. And I think that's really
yeah,
important for women. And it's difficult, especially if you had a family that brought you up
yeah,
to believe that that was what you should do. It's
yeah,
really hard.
yeah, yeah. I suppose that is that kind of idea of, yeah, who are we? Who are we without adding that layer of children? Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting kind of concept, I think. Yeah. So, do you have any advice for people who do have children about how to be more tactful and respectful for those who cannot?
I think just not to assume things. So, and also that dreaded question, is it by choice or not? Actually, it's none of your business. And also the one that everybody hates is, have you thought about adopting? Which is a ridiculous question. So just kind of not to do that, and also to
Yeah,
think that, um, and this is from someone I know actually, obviously not working at university because our university was closed at Christmas, but there was an assumption that she would always work Christmas because she didn't have children, and actually it was incredibly unfair because she has elderly parents who only have her.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So there was a real, and I find that incredibly unfair.
yeah. And I think that is, I think where people do need to be educated, and I think that's something that there needs a lot of work around is how how do you how do you talk to people about something that might be really, really difficult, in terms of, and not try and give them advice or tell them, because I think a really common one is, oh, I think the adoption one, or oh, if you just relax, it'll happen, and
No, I've not had God, that's
yeah, I
terrible.
know,
Oh,
and then I think there is that. Well, how do you respect somebody if you ask them, do you have children, and they say no? How do you then just respect it that they might not want to talk any further about it? Because I think people then do want to know more, and they think, well, actually, I don't want to tell you anymore, but it can be quite difficult sometimes because I think we're in a society where we don't really like to be rude to people, but actually maybe there is something about putting your boundaries in and
maybe there is, yeah. I don't know. I would probably just say no, but
yeah. So there are different types of childless communities nowadays. There's child free by choice, childless by circumstance, childless not by choice, and they're all in the book to some extent. Did you find things in common between these groups, or was there any notable differences?
They're kind of differences and similarities. So even with child-free people, I found I've got quite interested in the green people. You know, the people who don't have kids for green reasons, because that seemed to me a really kind of consistent and understandable and relatable position. So I'm not having children because of the mess the planet's in, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to contribute to that. So I really respected them. And in some cases, they were sad because they'd like to have had a child, but their principles around green living and respecting the planet didn't allow them to. So they were quite an interesting group to meet and talk to. Um, Child-free people in general were really nice, actually, because they always kind of respect, well, it was my choice, but it's not yours, so we're different. Obviously, people who are infertile, as I said earlier, we all have a commonality because we've had
Yeah.
this medical experience, this medical journey together, and so there's always lots to talk about, and it's not very pleasant. When I had endometriosis, a couple of times I went to endometriosis groups, and I can see why they help many, many women, and anybody here, I would say, do try it. It might be for you. It was not for me. I did not like sitting in a room for an evening, drinking wine, talking to women about my illness, which I was doing best to forget and get on with my life. But I can see how it supported other people. It very much depends on who you are. But there was a commonality with people in that circumstance.
Mhm.
I think people who were childless by circumstance sometimes were more difficult because they would say things like, well, I got to 45, I didn't have a man, and realised I kind of wanted a kid, but I hadn't had one, and it was too late, and now I'm really miserable. And I found that different. I'm not saying it's less, or because they sometimes get quite, but I found it very different because actually what you're saying is you didn't really want kids or you weren't that bothered about it for most of your life, then you change your mind, and that's not the same as kind of people that are going through IVF or fertility journeys or having children on their own, even if they haven't found a partner because they really want a child. So
Yeah.
they, buy sperm or have a donor or whatever because they really want a child. So I think that was probably the community I had least in common with
Mhm.
because some of the times I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand them. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with them or that they're just very different from me. I didn't understand them
Yeah.
because to me they were kind of like they weren't that bothered about having a kid, and that's fine. That's fine. I'm not judging. But then I didn't know why they felt they needed all this support and help and everything else because it wasn't. But that was, and I've spoken to other infertile women who've agreed with me about that. So I think it's kind of like it's
Mm.
just a difference between our journeys.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose the thing that everybody has in common is they don't have children, and that's the kind of, but everybody's there for different reasons.
Yeah, but then I mean, child-free people don't have children either, and and that's quite interesting because quite often they'll focus on things about living without children and tax and very practical things, and that's quite good actually. It's good for us as a childless community to listen to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think maybe um that might be kind of us towards the end, and I'm just wondering if there was any questions from anybody, any of the participants. I don't know if we give a minute or two for people to put any questions that they might want to ask. Otherwise, is there anything else that you would like to
No,
kind
there's nothing, but if there's anybody who would like to ask anything, it would be nice to hear from the people that have joined us.
of? No,
Can they speak? Does it let them speak?
no, I
Or
think it's just the questions need to go into the into the
come on, Tiny.
box.
The noise in the background is one of my cats.
Yeah, and we need to go in the chat box. I think for because in theory the webinar should go out like afterwards on
Oh, can you see a cat? Yeah, you can see this one. This is Jupiter.
yeah.
We rescued him from the Middle East from a lovely woman called Alexandra who and with the help of a charity who helps a lovely Scottish charity that helps bring them over when they're small and have been found on the street. We also have, I can let you see another cat. Come on. We've actually got 4 altogether. Tiggy, come on. Yeah. Tiggy is normally the most sociable cat out of all of them, but she's been a bit shy today. This is
Lovely.
Tiggy.
Yeah.
Tig Tig.
So
Her
what
full name, her full name is Glitterglam Antigua.
okay, lovely.
She's an ex-pedigree breeding queen, and
Um,
she's retired now, so she just comes to be loved, and we call her
yeah.
Tiggy.
So we've got a wee question there. How did you deal with the existential questions, issues associated with having no children? So I take it that's well.
It's a good question that actually. I think so there are different sets of existential questions. So there's the kind of existential questions around the planet and green space and, kind of not adding to things, but there's also existential questions around continuity of line. I love my parents, I'm an only child. So the line kind of ends with me. And I think those were quite difficult. In some ways, they were the most difficult question to deal with.
Yeah.
Um, because those were the ones that you can't really answer, and they could drive you mad if you keep them going. Oh, another cat! Hello,
I thought
poor
you'd be
cats.
enjoying as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
it does help being a mother to my cats. We have 4 cats, and they help hugely. I have to say, I recommend them. Um, I can't imagine what 7 failed rounds of IVF is like. I really can't. I'm really, really sorry to hear that. I just think that must be so hard. I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
Do you have pets? Does the person Lisa, do you have cats yourself or dogs or anything?
Right, we'll wait and see. Um, yeah, I think. Oh,
A puppy. We
fabulous.
love puppies. Puppies are good.
I think, yeah, 7 rounds of IVF is really, really tough. I did 2 and stopped after that. It was just too much for me, if I'm being honest. I just couldn't, and we were paying for it as well, so there was a
We run out of money.
there was a cost to it, yeah. It wasn't, I don't think it was so much the financial thing, it was really just, I just couldn't take anymore. Um, it was soul destroying actually, and I thought, I just weighed it up and thought this is time for me to stop.
Stop.
Yeah,
I think there must be one. Because I was told there was no point. We asked about it, and I would have been all right to get it, but I was told it was pointless. She said to me, "It will never take. There's just not enough. There's my body is completely wrecked. It won't take. You'd
yeah,
be wasting your time." And in a sense, I do still think that was fortunate.
yeah,
I just can't imagine that constant cycle of up and down and up and down. And I can understand somebody doing 7 or 8 because there's kind of that constant hope.
yeah. I
I think
think
that must be so hard. It must take
I
such a
know.
toll.
I think for me, it was because I didn't get any eggs the first time, and the second time I only got 2, and I think I realised that probably only one was viable, and actually I realised that probably that wasn't going to be, that was the best it was going to get, and they had to pump so many hormones into me that, it would just have been awful. So, and the person with the puppies just said, that, yeah, and then they wanted to free themselves from the suffering. I mean,
Yeah, I
the
can
hormones you
absolutely.
put in you is just unbelievable.
Terrible.
Yeah,
I can absolutely imagine that at some point you just say it's enough. I stopped having the surgeries for the same thing.
Mm.
Oh, did it affect me as a woman? Did it impact my sense of femininity? That's quite a good question. I don't think it did, but I think that's a lot to be grateful to my mum and dad about, because I was never brought up to believe that my kind of role in life was necessarily to be a mother, so I didn't have that kind of driver. But I think I did feel that I was, if this makes sense, I was kind of broken inside. So I did feel that there was something broken about me, but not, and I didn't feel less feminine. I did feel less complete, less kind of effective in a sense. And that was quite hard to deal with, but it just got better with time, to be honest.
Yeah.
It got better with time. It just, eventually you think, well, I am who I am and that's it. And kind of the one thing that endometriosis will not let you do is forget that you're a woman, because you have more or less constant pain. Periods are a nightmare. There's so many things you can't do. I mean, I went from I used to dance. I mean, I was a dancer before I went to university, and I supported myself undergraduate university in London by teaching dancing. And by the time in my late 20s, I couldn't do anything. Couldn't do anything. I was just sore, sick,
Yeah.
passing out, everything all the time. And actually, my surgeon said I was probably stopped being infertile. I probably was infertile from around my 20s, so it was quite young.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Do we have any more questions, or I think that might be kind of it. Yeah, I think that looks as though would maybe be our last question. Well, thank you very much, Lorna. That's been amazing. And I'm really
Thanks so
sorry I
much for
didn't
having me.
record the start of it. I'll need to see how we can manage that so that we can put something out. Um, I'll speak to my boss about that. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Lorna.
Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you for sharing little bits of your story with me and with Anna. That was really kind. Thank you. Lovely to be with you on this, even though we can't see each other, but really nice. Thank you for coming.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Bye bye. Bye
Bye.
bye.